Welcome back to BCB Live, the safest station in the nation. Hey, it's Monday, so you know what that is. It is time for our VP of Safety, Brian Runnels, with Reliance Partners to talk safety. Brian, top of the morning to you, sir. How you doing?
Good, man. How was your weekend?
You know what? Cowboys won. Anytime Cowboys win, it makes a ending of a great weekend or the beginning of a great week. How about that?
Yeah, the popularity of the Cowboys is great. Every weekend they win.
Especially when it's against those Eagles. Nobody likes the Eagles. Matter of fact, if you're an Eagles fan, I'm going to ask you to tune off this show right now. Just kidding. Safety's even more important than those Cowboys. And Brian, we've been talking a little bit pre-trip, post-trip. Today, it's those CSA scores. And, let's just go right down to it. The CSA scores. So many drivers, whether it's their PSP or any of those scores, they don't see the value or understand the value. How about that? What that means to them as a driver.
The farther we get away from when these rules first implemented back in 2010, the farther we're getting away from the importance of it to a driver. And I think that was really enlarged when it came to COVID and things like that, when, freight went crazy and, the rates were up and people were just trying to put drivers in seats. And since that wasn't required, and it still isn't, never was, I think some people got away from it. Motor carriers got away from it to put drivers in seats. And ultimately now they may be paying the piper on that a little bit, because we're seeing a lot of companies with higher scores due to not hiring the best drivers that they could possibly get. And hey, I get it. They're at the time you had to fill seats, but I think we're in a little bit of a different time now.
Man, it is such a different time. And you bring it up, and I agree 100%. Back in the day, and listen, this needs to be a back in the day conversation. If it's happening today, what I'm getting ready to say, you've got some problems and you need to listen to what Brian and I are talking about. But Brian, years ago, a great driver, the best driver, was a driver that got miles. It really had not much to do with safety.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, and it wasn't that long ago. I mean, when these rules first implemented, I'm going to go back in the day a little bit farther. I was at a carrier on the safety side, and drivers really wanted to know what their score was. Well, luckily, we were using a third-party vendor that could accumulate the scores and benchmark them and things like that. And it was a great program. It was fantastic. It had an app that I could use, and I could tell drivers what their score was. Well, that if you're not using a third party, it's difficult to do that. Yeah, you get your inspections and stuff like that through the portal, and you can see the point value of each inspection, but you don't know what the accumulative score is for a driver over the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah, you run your PSP, but that's really almost the first thing that needs to change. Is it can no longer be just a pre-employment thing. It needs to be something that can be run on an annual basis, a semi-annual basis, at will, something like that. It's not a program that needs to be pre-employment only, because drivers don't know what they have, and they don't know when things are falling off. And I would venture to say most of them don't care what those things are. And we've got to make them care again.
Yeah, that score from that driver, and listen, I think it does start with the driver, but Brian, I'm right with you too. Is these trucking companies, they've got to also make it important to them. It's got to be part of their hiring criteria. And to your point, they've also got to, they have to manage this. They have to sign a subscription with somebody, because there's companies out there that can give them real-time data, no longer waiting until the end of a year to run the annual physicals or the annual updates. Those things need to be checked more frequently. Gosh, I mean, there's services out there. When a driver gets pulled over, you get notification within, pretty close. As soon as that DOT officer fills it in, you may get a notification within 24 hours.
Yeah, if it gets uploaded at the end of the day, I know that was what ours was. As soon as that stuff was uploaded, the next morning we would get an email from the third party vendor that we were using that, hey, these inspections came in. And, Rick, as long as the CSA scores and stuff like that are going to be the gold standard for what insurance companies are looking at, I don't understand why you're not putting, and granted, we know the system's flawed. Okay. They're trying to make corrections to it and adjustments to it. Hopefully we'll see some of those adjustments this year, or I should say 2024. But as long as that is going to be one of the primary things that you look at, you got to do a better job protecting them. You just do.
What are ways for drivers, Brian, to get an update or to know how their score is? I mean, it seems basic, I think, but if I'm a driver, how do I even know what I look like to that open market out there?
That is the huge problem. The only way you're going to know is that now you have a right to view your PSP when someone runs it, but that's the only way to know.
Wow.
And that cannot be, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So that cannot be the only way that these drivers have access to the violations and stuff that they get, because, they get an inspection and it's got a litany of violations on it. And, in the old days, it just went on the company. And
Yep.
and I think we're almost back to that, where the drivers are thinking, it went to the company. I don't have to worry about that. And not only do they have to worry about that because of the number of violations, but the driver actually keeps this stuff on his record longer than the company does.
Mm.
The company keeps it on their CSA for 2 years, and drivers keep it for 3 years. And the crash data is even longer than that.
Wow, it's hard to imagine, and I'm gonna feed off this because it's hard to imagine that that in the real world it's kind of like the credit score, that if you don't know what your credit score is, how do you know when it's time to apply for a new loan or go get that house when it says you got to have a 750 or higher? Brian, is kind of the same thing. The drivers must have this in hand. They must know right now what my score looks like, because it's the difference, I think, in a driver running maybe with that flat tire, or maybe without doing that pre-trip or not doing it at all. If you know it's going to affect you, why would you take that trailer that you know is out of service?
Because you're willing to take it over the importance of time.
Yep.
I don't have any scales to go by. No one's going to look at it. Or
But
I know
if
by the
that
time I
keeps
get
you
there,
from
that
getting
scale's
another
low.
job, though, Brian, and I think that's what it's going to
Yeah.
have to get to. Then it will maybe then it will make you change how you do it. There has to be some consequences, not only to the driver or for the driver, but for the companies that hire drivers that are intentionally breaking these rules.
That was the initial intent of this whole thing, was to hold everyone accountable.
It has to.
And since drivers can't see it, and quite honestly, there's no industry standard for what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. That is strictly in the eye of the beholder. Who's ever looking at that PSP, or as an insurance company or someone like that, who's ever looking at the CSA scores for the company, they get to decide what is good and bad. When you got an MVR or something like that, what is it, 12 points or 9 points or whatever it is, and if you've got a severe violation on there, okay, there's no way we can hire that. There's standards there. And, they put this program in place. There's no industry standard. There's no industry requirement. There's no really rules to follow. It's up to you to decide. And as long as we have carriers and companies out there operating that are willing to either completely bypass the system or say, he won't run those kind of scores up here. Yeah, they will. If they've done it at the last 3 carriers they've been at, they're going to do it to you too.
They are.
There's a lot of frustration in the way of, in the like I said, in the willingness to take stuff to save time. Yeah, we'll get that looked at. when we get it to the shop instead of getting it fixed now.
Yep.
Yeah, that's all. That's great. But
Yep, I
you know,
get that part, Brian. I got a follow up question, but before I do that, hey, we got some sponsors here that we have to take care of. We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll be back in about 60 seconds with a little bit more with our very own Brian Runnels, VP of Safety for Reliance Partners.
There's several things around our core values that I'm very proud of. They are truly what guides our business. The very first one is we act with honesty and integrity in everything that we do. I'm very proud of that fact. I work for an organization that what our actions and the way we structure our business and the choices that we make, we act with integrity.
Welcome back to Hey, welcome back to BCB Live with Reliance Partners and their VP of Safety, Brian Runnels. Brian, before we went on break, we were talking about drivers and PSPs and their quote unquote their credit score. Here's the deal. If I hire a driver, and I got to hear this, if I hire a driver that has broken every rule in the last month, last 3 years, they just break rule, and I hire them, do I bring any of their sins to my company? Or are you telling me that I'm going to give this driver a clean and a fresh start?
I mean, technically, yeah, you're not bringing any of his points onto your score, but what you're bringing is somebody that has broke the rules everywhere he's been the last 3 years. What makes you any different than where he was before? So that's the sin that you're hiring. Let's bring it always back to frequency leads to severity. Okay, he's got the frequency already there. When does the severity kick in? Is it kicking in when the driver's with you? Are you going to skate through and, they're going to stay with you 6-8 months, a year, whatever it is, and then go and you lucked out? You don't know. I mean, that's a risk. If you're willing to take it, good luck.
But when you take that risk as a company, now I'm back on that trucking company. When you take a risk on somebody that has had a history of bad driving, of unsafe driving, of breaking rules, or whatever that is, and then that accident happens, man, haven't you opened yourself up to those attorneys?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got the negligent word that they put out there, and it always comes back to either negligent hiring, negligent training, negligent entrustment, and we can talk about one later about negligent maintenance. So, you've got those things, and they love that word, and that word plays really expensive. Bad for a trucking company in front of a jury.
Yeah, it sounds expensive, right? I mean, that word negligent is something you do not want coming up in court, especially if it's true. And Brian, when you're hiring somebody like that, I don't know how you get out of it because you've seen it. And if you're not using these tools, well, you're supposed to be. And Brian, when you hire somebody, but here's an exception, right? Because Brian, if I've had a truck open for months, I just have to get somebody in it. Isn't that the time I should bring that person in?
I appreciate what you're trying to say there, but no, that's not. I mean, you want to put people in the seat. I get it. You want to keep those trucks rolling. You've got truck payments to make. You've got bills to pay. The charges that are going to come in potentially from that driver that you're just putting in that seat to fill a seat is going to be way more than the cost of that truck payment.
Yeah, it's and it also, I think too, it goes to that heart and soul of that company. Let me tell you something, Brian. Him's right here is we all have hiring criteria, right? That number one's an important thing to do. But when you hire around that, when you hire somebody that you say doesn't fit your criteria, you're opening yourself once again, I think, for that negligent because you hired somebody that went against your own hiring criteria. Your criteria that you said, I won't hire you, you hired and you put them in there, and sometimes that desperation, you make bad decisions.
Well, and yeah, I think we're leading right towards next week is if you've got a policy that states you don't hire this person or, this violation, and you do.
Yeah.
When you start, like you said, when you start making exceptions to that, you might as well just throw that policy out the window. And, I see that all the time where drivers will fall out of the current hiring criteria for new drivers coming into a company. Well, if they've fallen out of that, how can you keep them on when you couldn't hire a new driver with the same violations? So, it's very important that if you're going to have a policy that's wrapped around, say, violations on a PSP or an MVR or whatever it is, you've got to follow those not only at the time of hiring, but you got to follow through with them as long as that driver is employed by you.
Brian, you're absolutely right, and a great topic for our next week conversation. Brian, we are out of time. Hey, I want to give you a chance. I'm going to let you close this out. We've been talking once again about drivers, about those CSA, the importance of their scores. Brian, give our drivers that are watching this right now, the companies, hey, give them some hope, give them some ideas on what they can do to improve this.
It goes back to what we talked about last week, and it is, yes, you do your pre-trips. Yes, you do your post-trips. You get stuff fixed. But I will always lean on, you've got to keep an eye on your equipment throughout the day. You've got to get those things caught, the nail in the tire, or, the mud flap fell off or something like that. You got to get that stuff found and fixed before it gets found by someone else. And, the other thing is, one of the first questions I always ask, going all the way back to our first conversation about hours of service, is this a driver issue or is this an operational issue? And there's the hope. You have to get your operations wrapped around, hey, can we get this stuff there safe and legal? And if we can't, it's not the load that we should probably be taking, whether it's from a broker or directly from a customer. Those are the words that you have to keep pounding into your operations, folks, is safe and legal. We've got to get it there safe and legal.
Absolutely. Brian, my heart is warm. You've done it today once again, sir. Hey, thank you for what you do out there. Let's have a great, safe rest of the week. And Brian, next Monday, we're talking a little bit about those hiring practices, that hiring criteria, that policy handbook, right? That cannot wait to get into a little bit of that. Until then, Stay safe out there, brother.
Thanks, Rick. See you next week.